Hi everyone, I'm going to talk to you about reference parameters, and this is probably the most abstract part of chapter 6. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Assume that the whole the C++ skeleton that I put there, I'm going to ignore all the pound, include, using namespace, and approach it from directly to the code with it. In this case, I'm going to write this code. I'm not going to use the function prototype. I'm going to put the function before the int main. If I put the function before the int main, then there's no need to actually use a function prototype. So what we have here, I'm going to go ahead and write the function. I'm going to give you an example with the function I'm going to write. So it's a void function. You do know that there's two types of functions. When a user defined, there's a void and there's a value. All reference parameter are all void functions with it. So let's say I call this thing function 1 in this case. I'm going to use a reference parameter. How do I know it's a reference parameter? I put an ampersand after the data type, and I'm going to call the variable, the parameter I'm going to set across as y. In this case, I'm going to create just a really simple function inside of this thing. I'm going to call this function cout. I want output whatever I have here as a string. I want to output this as a string here, and then I'll put the y just to demonstrate what we're talking about. Then I'm going to basically go into this thing. I'm going to change that y to number 6. You can see this. I've made up this number right here, and then I'll put the same to see what happens inside of that. Okay, so let's come down here, assuming I have all the other stuff. Like I said, I have my main function. This is where we call our main functions. All the functions that you have, that sits in here. So we start out with something very, very simple, like x is equal to 5, and then I'm going to cout this thing. Here's x, and here's going to be x. So at this point right now, if I output this thing, if I did x is equal to 5, what is x right now? It's going to come across as what? 5, right? It's going to come down to the next line, correct? And this time, I'm going to call this function, function 1, in here. That's how I call it. So for me to call it, meaning function 1, give it a parameter, call it, I want to pass in this parameter, x right here, is that x. I put that in here, correct? Now, I call this function, x is going to come in place of y. It's a reference parameter. It changes the memory, because it has the address in there of the memory. It doesn't change them. It has the memory address. Now I could write to it. So I output this time. I'm going to output. Let's take a look inside of this thing. Inside of this thing is y is coming in as 5. I cout y. I'm sorry. I should really, let me come back to this part. I left this part out. It's x equal to. I forgot to tell you that. So this part right here should be this part right here, correct? So after you put in 5 here, going back to the original x is equal to 5, cout, you have a string of x equal to 5. That looks like this. Okay? Now, you call the function 1, you pass 5 into it. 5 comes in as this y as a reference parameter. It's going to do cy equal. So I'm going to do equal, and it's going to tell you that I want you to output the y, which is what? 5. Okay. Now, then inline goes down to the next line. And then you come down here, you call the function 1. Here's your function 1. You pass in the 5 in here. What happens when you pass in the 5? Well, this time, again, alright, you come down here, y is changed to 6. Okay? Now, 6 is assigned to 5. So what does that mean? That means your function in here, alright, your function in here comes out to be what? So it's going to be y is equal to 6, correct? Now, I'm going to call back I'll come back to this main function. I'm going to do cout. I'll put this x right here again. What do you think this x is going to be? This x right now has been changed already. It went to a 6. That's the major difference. So if you did this, now x is equal to 6, correct? That's what happens with this thing. So this is my point, because of this reference parameter. Now, if you went into this thing, and this didn't have a reference parameter here, and you pass it as a regular y, as a regular parameter, not a reference parameter, just a regular formal parameter with this thing, you come across everything still comes out as x is equal to this x, which is 5, which is this output right here, correct? And then you come down here, you call this function 1, you pass 5 into this thing, you output this y, this is this y, it's 5. And then you change the y equals to 6 is not equal to y, and this change it to this. Now, and then you call the function, you call the output this would go back to 5. Okay, that's the difference, because it is, if you put a reference parameter here, all right, this allows you to, it writes in the memory, it changes because it has that memory address with it, it will change this to a 6. Okay, and once this happens, that's all it takes with it. So I did this as a really quick mini shot so you could see what actually takes place inside of the reference parameter with it as well. Okay, let me go ahead and do the second part for this thing. Just some really, let's say I take the same, this is part 2, I take that same function that we were looking at. Let's change this up a little bit with it. Let's say I take this reference parameter, I do and call it an add1 function, whatever I have on here. I still pass across as a reference parameter is y. I'm going to change the inside of this thing. Let's take that out. Take this part out, for example. And what I would like for you to do is, if you can imagine this function that we have here, I'm just going to update that function to add 1 to this y. Every time when I call the add 1, it's going to add 1 to the function with this thing. Inside of this thing, again, I have int x is equal to 5. And then inside of this, I'd like for you to think of how I could actually, I'm still going to use the cout so you can see that what happens in x. And then I'm going to call the add 1, I'm going to pass x inside the add 1, this x inside it, and then I'm going to call it again so you can see what actually takes place, not that one, I'm sorry. I'm going to output this cx, the x for you with this thing. Okay, so take a look at this, and again, there's always have to be returned as a false with this thing. All right, let's take a look at what's going on here. What's going on in this thing? I'm going to put in 5 as x. Output this, so it's going to have, the first output's going to have what? X is going to equal to 5. Okay. And next line down, and then I'm going to call the add 1 function, pass this x inside of that function as a parameter, comes in across here as your 5, this is add 1, this is going in as 5, remember this is a reference parameter, so I do what? This is what I'm saying, y plus 1 equals to y, so that's 5 plus 1 is 6 equal to y, y now is equal to 6, and I output this statement now becomes what? X equals to 6. Okay, so this is another example I want to point out here. This is only one parameter that you're coming across in the book as we go through this. I'm going to use the trace table that you're going to see that you're going to have the first parameter, the second parameter, and remember these are your bare minimum, your signature with it. So the bare minimum is the data type. I mean, the actual formal parameter is not necessarily important. And when you have the bare minimum C++ are your data types in here. Okay.